Hello, my name is Emma Hickey. I work at Greenwich Library. I'm excited to introduce to you today our latest feature for Date with an Author. I'm here with author Dana Thomas. She wrote the New York Times bestseller Deluxe, How Luxury Lost Its Luster. Yes. And she is currently a regular contributor to the New York Times style section. Today, we are here to talk about her most recent book, Fashionopolis, Why What We Wear Matters. I have my copy here, which was released toward the end of 2019. She is joining us from Paris. Welcome, Dana.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
So we're happy to have you. We're excited to delve into your book. Like I mentioned, we're here to talk about Fashionopolis, published in 2019. Can you give us a brief synopsis about your book, specifically for people who are unfamiliar with fashion and with sustainability and ethics in the industry?
Right. Well, all three books, in fact, are books about fashion and not about fashion. I have a long time general assignment features and news writer. I worked for the Washington Post. I worked for Newsweek magazine in Paris. I write for the New York Times, and I've contributed to the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. So that's, I'm an old school newspaper reporter and news magazine reporter. And what I've done is, one of the beats, because I live in Paris, that I cover is fashion. And I covered it during a period when it changed from small family run companies to big global corporations, and during the period of the birth of fast fashion, which we think of, which is, H&M, Zara, Gap, and so on. And so I use all three of my books, because I also wrote Gods and Kings, The Rise and Fall of Alexander McQueen and John Galliano, to discuss big themes, most importantly, globalization and the unbridled capitalism during the era of globalization and the backlash to globalization. And I use the fashion industry to look at all these different these happenings, these cultural moments. So Fashionopolis is about, well, I'll tell you, Deluxe is about how the luxury industry sacrificed its integrity for the sake of profit, and about how it rolled out into became public companies and rolled out globally, and along the way lost the magic that is luxury because it became mass produced. It was, cutting corners to please shareholders and often give them their returns, their expected returns each quarter. And the second book, Gods and Kings, is about about the war between art and commerce, which are two of the, it's one of the oldest battles, that's been going on since ancient Greece and Rome, the war between art and commerce, and how during the age of globalization, commerce really did clobber art, and art became subservient to commerce, meaning profit, and how this impacted the creative side of the fashion industry and drove some designers to crack up and even commit suicide. Sorry, I have sun coming in. And then Fashionopolis is a third of this trilogy, and it's about how the fashion industry sacrificed humanity and the planet, which sounds really huge, I know, but sacrificed humanity and the planet for the sake of profit. But we call it the Book of Hope, because while I do trace the side of fashion in the first third of the book, all the way back to Manchester 250 years ago with the birth of the Industrial Revolution, and how the garment industry has moved from place to place to place and taken all the horrors with it, from Manchester to New York City, then eventually down to the south of the United States, and then overseas during globalization. And so all the bad things have always carried on, that even, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels and Charles Dickens were writing about 150 years ago, still happening. That's only 1/3 of the book. I also talk about the goodness that's happening now with slow fashion, the reaction to fast fashion, and the backlash to globalization. And then the last third of the book is about how we're moving forward with cool technology and with and really fabulous entrepreneurs, driven entrepreneurs and change makers who are trying to stop the bad and give us some path to good and repair the planet and not harm humanity, and or take advantage of humanity. Exploitation, take the exploitation out of the industry. And yes, it'd be out of the fashion industry, but it could be in any industry. I could be talking about widgets, but widgets are a lot less sexy and harder to understand.
Yeah, I really like that aspect of your book, the positive, the hope, because I think especially if you're coming into this subject matter from not having any background in it, you want that. You want to learn about it, but also learn about what the actionable change can be made in the future and what's being made. So before we continue, you talk a lot about why what we wear matters, which is a subtitle for your book. Do you have anything that you're wearing? I know we're on a Zoom call. Is there anything that's special to you that matters to you? Want to get personal background from you? Or does it say anything about your relationship to the industry or humanity's relationship to the industry?
Well, I mean, like today, I'm wearing whatever's been in my closet. I'm at home. I'm in the country, and I came here unexpectedly during lockdown, so I just have what's what was in the closet here that I kind of forgot about.
Yeah.
But I do wear as much as possible sustainable garments. They, becoming more and more easy to find, to be sure that you can shop at Stella McCartney for luxury design wear and know that it's all sustainably sourced from beginning to end. You can shop there are all sorts of small brands, or you can find, I highlight some of the great, up and comers in the book, such as Alabama Channon out of Florence, Alabama, who only uses organic cotton. And there's loads of them. You can go now on Net-a-Porter, and there's a whole section dedicated to sustainable fashion. And the same with there's a platform out of London called Rêve en Vert, which means dreaming in green, and it's 100% sustainably sourced fashion. So it's a bit like the organic food movement 25 years ago. It was kind of hard to find organic food unless you went to the crunchy granola burlap hippie store, and now you have Whole Foods. Well, we're not quite to the Whole Foods level yet, and Amazon surely hasn't bought up any of the big brands yet, nor started a whole section, but we're getting there. That Net-a-Porter has dedicated, and Farfetch and Matches Fashion, and these online websites have dedicated a section now to sustainable fashion. It's easier to, and it's getting out there. It's becoming more mainstream, which is great news.
Yeah, and I like that you make that comparison with the food movement. I think a lot of people, the farm to table, the farm to closet, make that comparison. And I think that's great to make it understandable on a mainstream level, because a lot of people are now understanding the farm to table movement. So, we talked about your book. You mentioned briefly fast fashion and slow fashion. Can you give us and you mentioned big players like Zara and H&M. Can you give us a one sentence synopsis of what fast fashion is and what slow fashion is for those watching who may not know what those terms mean?
Absolutely. So fast fashion is fashion made cheaply at every level and sold cheaply. It's made at lightning speed, delivered, sold in massive amounts in thousands of stores, chain stores worldwide. It's based on usually ripped, knockoffs, as we say, ripped off from high design. They're just doing cheap versions of it and selling it for, $15, $20, $25, with the idea that you wear it fast, you throw it away fast, you burn through it fast, like fast food. And that it's cheaper to buy a new item than it is to dry clean it, and it wouldn't hold up to dry cleaning anyway. So it's about pushing consumption at lightning speed, and the people who own those brands have become wildly wealthy. The man who owns Zara is one of the richest men in the world, within the top 5.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty astounding, because you associate it, obviously all those purchases add up. They're cheap purchases, but they're made so rapidly that they've accumulated so much wealth.
And
So that was really,
they're the source of an enormous amount of pollution, and from during the creation, but also the afterlife, and throwing them into landfill.
right.
60% of clothes today are made of polyester, which never biodegrades, and they're made in factories where people are paid half of a living wage in places like Bangladesh and Cambodia. Just this week, Mango, which is a fast fashion brand, reportedly fired from 800 workers were fired from a factory that makes mango clothes in Cambodia, simply because they asked for clean drinking water. That's the kind of when I say crimes against humanity in the fashion industry, that it's that sort of thing.
Right.
And these fashion brands, that's how they make their money. That's why the clothes are so cheap. If
Yeah.
if you paid $20 for it, that means the person who made it was paid 20 cents.
Right. And then, and on the other hand, can you just briefly tell us what you define slow fashion is?
And slow fashion is, the backlash to all of that. It's about making things with craft and love and care, not overproducing. Often it's about making things to order. For example, in a brand that I write about in Fashionopolis is based in Florence, Alabama, named it's called Alabama Channon. And she makes everything to order. You go online, you order it. She has it made and then shipped to you directly. And it's made with organic cotton, and it's sewed by one seamstress and signed and numbered. And yes, it's expensive, but it's expensive compared to fast fashion because fast fashion is artificially underpriced because they haven't paid anyone along their supply chain what they're worth. And she is paying her workers what they're worth, and her suppliers what they're worth, and the farmers who grow the cotton get paid what they're worth. Everybody along her supply chain is paid a living wage or what they're worth for their skill, their time, and their craftsmanship, and their education. And so actually it is the proper price for clothes. We've actually never paid less for clothes today than we pay less for clothes today than we ever have. They've never been cheaper. And if you stop to think about it, it's hard to imagine. But when I was working on the book, I came across a story in the New Yorker from the 1930s about Hattie Carnegie, who was the great retailer of New York at that time, and she had a ready-to-wear line called that Raymond Chandler called the Secretary Special in Farewell My Lovely, and you can, and it was the equivalent of fast fashion, and it cost the same amount. It was $20-$25 a suit. So the fact that during the Great Depression, when we were in worst economic situation we've ever been in for years and years, that we were paying the same amount for clothes while we earn so much more, shows you how deflated the price of fashion is because of offshoring and because of sourcing in sweatshops in low-cost countries.
Yeah, the prevalence of it are you saying the prevalence of it has lowered the price, or the need for prevalence because the need to keep up with trends and
No, it's
whatever?
just how these companies are set up, that they don't pay
Right.
their workers what
Yeah.
they pay them half a living wage, they pay the farmers too little, they pay everybody along the supply chain. They just squeeze the cost of the garments so then they can sell it for a profit, but it's still cheap.
Yeah, right. And going into more about the current situation in the industry, you talk a lot about materials. And there's a lot of materials that are prevalent today. And I want to touch on two of them. One of them is denim. And you say, or there's a statistic out there that says 50% of the world is wearing denim at any given time, which it makes total sense because you see it everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Can you tell us the main issues with the denim industry, especially distressed denim in laundering? For people who don't know, distressed denim is ripped jeans, which is very trendy and has been for a while, faded denim, etc. What is behind that industry we see on everyone all the time, every day?
Well, it's interesting. Denim, blue jeans were originally invented to be the most sustainable garment, and they were for about 100 years. They were invented by Levi Strauss and his business partner in the mid 19th century as durable pants for miners to wear while crawling around in caves and mines in Northern California during the gold rush. And those rivets were there to hold the seams together. That wasn't a fashion accessory or decoration, it was utilitarian. But in the 1980s, blue jeans became a fashion item. And part of the fashion, there was designer jeans, of course, late 70s, early 80s with like Calvin Klein and Gloria Vanderbilt. But then there was also this new idea of pre-washed and pre-distressed jeans. Before then, and you bought your jeans one size too big, and then you did shrink to fit. You could sit in your bathtub and wear them, or you washed them and broke them in. And it took a while wearing them to break them in, but they lasted a long time and they were really solid and fabulous. And then it was really nice to watch them sort of slowly aging. And so they were dark blue and then a lighter blue, and then they got this sort of gray. And I remember having sort of a rotation where one was like super soft and starting to fray at the edges, and one was in the middle zone, and then it was time to get a new pair because that first pair was about to start cracking and would be, cut off soon. And we paid a fair amount of money for those jeans. We paid more today, more then than I think you do today. And they lasted a long time. I kept mine, and my 20-year-old daughter now wears my old jeans from the 70s and the 80s, and they're solid and they look fantastic. But in the 1980s, a new practice came up called stone washing. And then after that was acid washing. And basically brands were pre-washing the jeans with lava stones in the washers, using gallons and gallons and hundreds and thousands of gallons of water to make the jeans soft for us when we buy them. But that gave them a shorter life. So then we were buying them more often, and we were buying more, and we were throwing them away more. And the consumption of jeans sped up. And of course, the industry loved it because that meant we were buying more. But it was bad for the planet because we were also throwing them away. It's funny where you can find jeans today. All the different things we use our old jeans for. They use them for mattress ticking. They use them for insulation in houses. They even use them for in dollar bills, because there's threads in dollar bills, and some of that cotton comes from denim. And they're always looking for ways to get rid of jeans, because we produce 6 billion pairs of jeans every year. That's a lot of blue jeans. So the acid washing and the stone washing, of course, as you can imagine, was terrible for the environment. Also on the process level, just by listening to that idea, you can go like, right, that's not good. And of course, when they wash all these jeans all the time, they were washing out gobs and gobs of dye, which would, at some factories in far-flung places, was being dumped directly into riverways and waterways and rivers, because there was no oversight, no regulations in some of these offshoring destinations, and turning the rivers black. And so then they would die because the sun couldn't get through, and there was no oxygen and no sunlight. So then the rivers were beyond polluted and dead, and the factories would shut down and move on to a new place and keep dumping and dumping. All in all, just became a complete climate horror. And it's funny to think that blue jeans could become when they began as the most sustainable garment, but they are. And so I explained the whole birth and process of jeans up to today, including talking about the Japanese craftsmen in southern Japan who still make denim, and this beautiful old-fashioned denim. And I go and visit an indigo farmer, a natural indigo farmer in Tennessee, who's trying to bring back natural indigo, because 99% of our indigo today is synthetic and not terribly good for the planet. And then I talked to a cool company in Valencia, Spain, that uses lasers to distress the jeans, and robots, and it's super high tech, so it's far less polluting, and it's also terrible. It's not so terrible for workers. I visited, as I described in the book, sweatshops in Vietnam where they're distressing the jeans by hand, and describe what a sort of 19th century nightmare that whole system is, and how there is this cool tech way that's much better, much cleaner, and much safer.
Yeah, you name a lot of really cool innovations in the industry. And in addition to denim, you talk a lot. So what a lot of people don't know is a lot of us are walking around wearing clothes made of trees, not in a good way. We're wearing viscose, rayon, modal. Can you just talk a little bit about why that industry needs to have attention paid to it? What are the issues in that industry, and what's changing?
Well, rayon and viscose are a bit like paper. That they take tree pulp, they mow down trees, and they take the tree pulp and they break it down to cellulose, and then they use that cellulose to spin the yarn, and then the yarn is woven, and then it's made into this fabric. And as you can imagine, to get to all those different points, there's a lot of chemicals that are used. There are some systems now that are certified sustainable, and they're recycling the chemicals, and they're using cleaner, greener chemicals and so on, but still it's a lot of chemicals. And it's a lot to do to a poor old tree just to get a fabric, when we already have wool, silk, cotton, and linen, which are perfectly fine fabrics. So, to go through all that for a tree is a lot, or for a fabric. And some of these trees are farmed, and they're farmed sustainably, but then a lot of them in the industry are cut from old growth forests, from the rainforest, from places, Malaysia. Malaysia is one of the, Malaysia or Indonesia. One of the two, I can't remember, it's in the book, is one of the centers for tree farming for rayon and viscose for this industry. And, they don't have such strict farming rules. And so they go into old growth forests, into rainforests, and cut down, endangered species, and just to turn it into pulp, to turn into fabric that is then used by fast fashion for garments that are worn a handful of times and then thrown away. The average garment today is worn 7 times before it's thrown away. And I think it's actually, in China, it's 3 times, which means it's really less than 7 times. And that's a lot of, and you'd use 100, 200, 300-year-old tree to make a shirt that's worn 3 times and throw it away. It's kind of a crime against humanity and the planet, right? So that there have been some work in cleaning up this industry, and there's a really great nonprofit in Canada called Canopy, like the canopy of the rainforest, and they've worked hard in conjunction with companies like Stella McCartney to clean up and make the rayon industry a bit more accountable. But in a perfect world, we should sort of phase that fabric out. It's not good, and we have good.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of leading me to my next question. You interview a lot of people who talk about, and you talk about the kind of reluctance to change, and how especially there's a lot of old-fashioned ideas that people just don't want to change on the industry. What do you think could be a catalyst for change in specifically the sustainability of the industry? You talk, there's one part where you talk to a jeans expert who says, we're not in the business of worrying about the planet. We're worried about, our jobs. And what do you say to people who, just constantly say, we'll worry about that later. We'll be, that'll be an afterthought. What do you think could be a turning point? Do you think there is a possible turning point? Do you think it's possible at all?
Yeah, well, one of the people in the book said, it's cheaper to pollute. And cheaper means bigger profits. I think that there are 2 ways that we're going to have change. First is coming from consumers who just won't put up with it anymore. The power of the purse, which is super important. And that if you know that those brands are committing, crimes against humanity or against the planet, then you just stop patronizing them and make a lot of noise about it. And there have been such things, like during the early days of the pandemic, there were major brands that didn't pay their bills in Bangladesh and canceled their orders and the factories were shut down, and the workers are only paid once a month, and they were sent home without their pay, and there was starvation. And these were major brands, and there was a whole movement on Twitter and a hashtag, shame them, shame the brands, and make them pay up. I think it was called Pay Up. And
yeah, by Remake.
And you've heard of, the Tommy Hilfigers of the world, and those kinds of sort of major level brands. I can't remember if Tommy was one of them, but that level of brands were not paying their bills. And they were, and through the force of social media, some of them capitulated and did pay their bills, which is fantastic. So there's that, but there's also, just plain old school boycotting. And if you just say, that's a bad company that's doing bad things to people and to the planet, let's not spend our money there. They'll either go out of business or they'll change their ways. And then lastly, I think really important, it will be regulation. I think we're in desperate need of regulation on all different levels. I think that fashion advertising should be and particularly fast fashion advertising should be regulated like fast food advertising is regulated. I think that we should hold factories that are offshore to the standards of the ones that are onshore. That we should, in the United States should say, we're not going to import clothes that are made in sweatshops. You must meet our labor standards at your factory, or you can't import clothes to our country. And, make sure that the safety exits are unencumbered, and that there are fire extinguishers in the building, and that people are paid a living wage, and real base, and have vacation, and have maternity leave, and have clean drinking water, really basic stuff, right? And I think that we need regulation on the industry. It's completely, it's almost completely deregulated, and to a fault. It's deregulated to a fault. And it needs some regulation, because there are crimes that are committed every day because there is no oversight overseas.
Yeah, and with the new administration coming in the U.S. specifically, do you see that possibly changing? Someone you interview talks about bringing, in your book, bringing the brands to the table at a federal, with federal agencies, bringing actually the CEOs. Now, do you think we're too focused on other things? Obviously, COVID is number one priority. The U.S. is having a huge outbreak constantly. Do you think that that's something that could possibly be on the table with the new administration coming in?
I think more so on the environment side than on the humanitarian side. But even that, we don't let farmers spray DDT on their cotton. That's already something, right?
Right. Yeah.
But they do, but there are other countries that don't mind it. And so they get the cotton sprayed with DDT and we don't. And I think it needs to be, global. Like, if you spray DDT on any of your cotton, even if it's going to a country that allows it, you can't come in our country. And I think that, you can't use dyes. If you dump dyes in the river, then you can't come in our country. If your clothes can't come in our country. If you are chugging out toxic air from your factories, or using toxic chemicals in the processes, you can't import in our country. I think already, if we start there, it will make a big difference, because those toxic things are bad for the workers too. And so you'll be improving their lives by enforcing climate issues.
Yeah, so you talk about social media and about federal agencies. You also you interview Stella McCartney. For people who don't know, Stella McCartney is Paul McCartney's daughter. She is big in the luxury, sustainable, ethical fashion industry. She has a lot of innovations coming up, and always coming up. She talks about infiltrating from within. That's why she's participated in controversial, known polluters, and worked with them. Do you think, there's been a lot of, with the Black Lives Matter protests and a lot of that, there's been a lot of call to action in terms of capitalism and questioning if it's actually the solution because it's the problem. Do you think that, in your opinion, in your experience in all the interviews you've done, do you think that that is the best solution, infiltrating from within? Obviously, like I said, you mentioned federal action and social media action. Or do you think that there's a better way, or do you think there's a number one way to tackle this? Or do you think it really takes that integrated approach?
I think it takes a little bit of everything. Now, she's been doing it because her brand was first at one major luxury group. And so she said, we're doing this. And if we can do it and make money, then why isn't everybody in the group doing this and making money? If you run your company more efficiently on an environmental level, you're saving money. That's good for your shareholders. So let's just do it. Let's not be silly about these things. Now she has sold a portion of her company to another group. So she's now in a different luxury group that has LVMH, that has 75 brands altogether. And again, she's trying the same tactic there. Like, look, if she says things like, if our job is to sell luxury, and organic cotton is seen as a luxury, then why aren't we only sourcing organic cotton? And when she puts it that way, you go like, right? Hard to argue with that. If wool coming from a sustainable farm is seen as a luxury, then why aren't we only sourcing wool that comes from sustainable farms? From beautiful ranches in the middle, in New Zealand, where there's plenty of space and open grazing. And why aren't we sourcing our gold and our silver sustainably and not hurting the planet? And so she's putting those questions out there. And then when she shifts her brand and shows that it can work and has done the groundwork, then the rest of the group kind of follows suit. Now it was interesting, because one of the things she stood for at Caring, the first group which she was with, was stopping the use of PVC, which is a plastic that is very toxic. And it's what you have on the coating of raincoats. It's what makes clear heels on a shoe. It's what's the plastic bit in the handle of a handbag. It's also used for toys, strollers. You know, it's the plastic that's hard and moldable. And she said, let's get rid of PVC. It's toxic. And she said, you know, that meant getting rid of most sequins, because at the time that she suggested this 6 or 7 years ago, most sequins were made of PVC. Now there's because she started this and said, I need sequins that aren't made of PVC, a whole sector of the market has switched over. And now there's all sorts of sequins that aren't PVC. So because of the demand, then the response came. But one of the things that was PVC was coating those handbags, sort of like the Louis Vuitton handbags, that plastified coating that's on some of the canvas handbags. And after she left Kering, that came back to Gucci. But for a while there, PVC had been banned from the whole group. None of the brands at Kering were using it, but it was a short-lived ban. And then it kind of sneaked back in when she was gone, which I think is really sad, because they show that they can do it. But, you know, profit and greed overruled that.
Right. And again, that reluctance to change and kind of going back, staying with old habits.
Easy,
Yeah.
And we know it makes money.
Right. So actually, that's a perfect segue into my next question about, so moving on to more of the future and innovations. You talk about a lot of really cool fibers, from rhubarb leather, mycelium/mushroom-based leather. There's pineapple leather, which is more in the market now. There's a silk made from repurposed orange fiber, growing your own leather, etc. What do you see as, or what are you most excited about? And then also, what do you see as the most marketable on a mainstream level? Like, what could be prevalent so that the average person could possibly get it one day?
Actually, both are the same response, which is there's this company out of Seattle that I spotlight in the book called Evernew. And they are taking our old cotton, t-shirts, socks, curtains, tablecloths, blue jeans, and breaking them down to a molecular level, regenerating the cellulose, the cotton cellulose, spinning it again, and using it as like it's a virgin quality cotton, brand new. So all the cotton that goes into landfill now can be regenerated and recycled, which I think is really exciting. And Levi's is running a pilot program now, I think, with them. They're scaling up. They did 2 experimental pairs of jeans to show, you know, proof of concept, and now they're scaling it up so they can put it into their supply chain, which is great. Now you would say, oh, but isn't this going to hurt cotton farmers? Well, no, because as I explained in the book, cotton, I think 1% of our cotton today is organic, and the rest of it's conventional or sustainable. And conventional cotton is treated with gobs and gobs of chemicals. 1 kilo of chemical requires 1 kilo of chemicals. And one of those chemicals used, as I write in the book, is called PIX. And it forces cotton plants to produce 6 times more cotton than they normally should. It's sort of like a fertility drug for cotton plants. But the plants therefore fatigue faster, and they're overproducing cotton, and that means they're using 6 times much more water, they're using 6 times much more everything. And so because cotton is one of those things where you're paid per yield per acre, so if you're getting 6 times more cotton per acre, you're getting 6 times more money. So that's why they're doing it. It's a bit like that story of the cow that they fed hormones to and that would produce 4 times more milk. Same idea, except that you had all sorts of health issues with the cows because they were getting infected because they were being milked too much, and then you had to give them antibiotics and well, the same thing with the cotton industry. So it would be perfectly fine for the cotton industry to produce less cotton because it actually overproduces cotton at the moment, and to go back to a normal level where they don't push the plants to produce 6 times more cotton per plant, and therefore suck 6 times more nutrients out of the soil. And then we would have, you know, it's all a chain, you know, it all fits together. So I think ever new would be great because it will be using waste and it will push the cotton industry to go back to more responsible farming.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Kind of, are you saying it would also act as a competitor and kind of, uh, you know, create a new standard within the industry?
Yeah,
For the, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and it'll be great to
Responsible
see.
farming.
Yeah, it'll be great to see the ripple effects of that, and hopefully sooner rather than later. It's a very interesting fiber, an interesting process you talk about. I really enjoyed reading that part. And now going on to digital advances, you talk a lot about how digital advances have changed the nature of the industry. Um, a lot of people have been able to actually become more localized because they've been able to outsource. Just because you have a production, a local supply chain in the rural South, doesn't mean you have to have designers there. You could have designers in New York. You could have them work remotely. Do you think that, um, especially because of COVID, and the advancement of digital technologies, people are going to start moving back to a more localized supply chain because they realize they have more control, and in the same day you can visit your corporate office and your factory and your farm. Do you think maybe COVID will have that ripple effect?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that has been very clear is that when a country, a producing country like Bangladesh, for example, shut down 100%, the supply chain was broken and they couldn't get any clothes. They had no supply. It was finished. It was like, that was it. So there were brands that were really stuck with inventory issues briefly, and then they shut all their stores and it all capped. But basically it showed the vulnerability of the supply chain, that say something terrible happens in one of the places where they produce, whether it's a tsunami or it's a war or an outbreak of a disease and everything closes for one reason or another. These brands are so and when Italy closed, then the luxury industry was stuck. They're so dependent on one geographical area because that's how they set everything up, that it made them very vulnerable to these things and put them in a real pickle. So I think you are going to see more distribution of production, that there'll be sort of a bit in the United States, a bit in Europe, a bit in Asia, and also that you'll be able to pivot quickly. I loved how Brooks Brothers, because they own their own factory, one of the few brands that still did at the time, pivoted from one day to the next from making neckties to making masks. And Louis Vuitton did the same thing with one of their perfume factories. They pivoted from one day to the next from making perfume to making gel, because they own their factory and because it was just down the road and they could go meet with everybody and do this. And so I think that idea of being more flexible and having more control over your product is very important, but also being, just protecting your supply chain and making sure that it doesn't break again will push these brands. There was already a reshoring movement happening. Some production, as I write in the book, has been coming back to the United States and to Europe because production in China, for example, has gotten more expensive as workers have become more skilled and demand more rights and more pay. And because shipping was becoming increasingly expensive. So and states like the Carolinas were offering tax incentives for companies to reopen in those regions. But I think you're going to see even more of this movement now, definitely.
Yeah, and speaking of big movements in the future, you talk about resale. You also mentioned the democratization of fashion, and I think a lot of people do see that resale as that, because you do get sometimes a very high quality product that's normally out of reach at a much lower price. And the resale industry is also obviously has a lot of potential for sustainability. Do you see that as, in the future, something that's going to out profit the virgin industry, the regular, the sales of the regular industry? What do you see for the future of that industry?
Yes, resale is definitely booming. And here's why it's booming: because we've been sitting at home for 6 and 8 months. cleaning out our closets and refinding things that we loved and we're wearing them again. But then we're also saying, I haven't worn that in 10 years. I think I'll get rid of it. And instead of throwing it away, we're putting it on places like the Real and Vestiaire Collective, or taking to the charity shops. There was a period this summer in England where there were signs in front of charity shops saying, please do not give us any more clothes. We don't know where to put them all. And so I think that, yes, resale will come back with a vengeance, and in part because there's such great clothes out there that are in perfectly fine condition. Why not? And fashion doesn't change terribly much anymore. Trends don't change like they used to. And if you look at movies from 10 or 15 years ago, you'd be wearing, I remember when you had only straight leg jeans, or you only had peg jeans, or you only had flare jeans. Now you have one of every, and whatever day of the week you wear whatever you want. But there isn't one specific trend, that everything's all mashed together, because designers have been referencing periods all over the place. And so some are referencing the 80s, and some are referencing the 60s, and some are referencing the 90s, and it's all mixed up. So if they're mixed up in their mission of design, then we can also, wear whatever we feel like wearing, that there isn't specific dictates anymore. That's great for consumers, but that also means that clothes don't go out of fashion. So, you can go and pick up something that was 4, 5, 6 years old and it looks perfectly fine today. And because there is such an overproduction and so much out there, resale shops are heaving with clothes. I was with my daughter, we went to the Salvation Army in Alabama, and she bought a Ralph Lauren cotton Oxford shirt button down for $1. $1. And it was perfect, blue with some pinstripes in it. $1. That tells you that we have an oversupply of clothes, perfectly fine clothes. I'm glad that they're in resale places and not in the dump, because we should never throw away our clothes. There's always another use for them. I spoke to 2 young students from Stanford yesterday who are taking leftover fabric and turning it into new fashion, the fabric that used to just be thrown away. So there's plenty of use. So I think resale is the future, and also renting. There's the three R's we say for clothes now: repair, resell, and rent. And the renting market is going up. It's not just, rent the runway. There's all sorts of industries. And one of the most interesting, in my opinion, is renting wedding dresses, because you only wear it once. I mean, I wore my mother's, so that one got worn twice, but that's a rarity. Most women want their own wedding dress, right? But now you can rent it. And there's something nice about that, because it carries the happiness of joy from somebody else. You're sharing that joy along the way, and the dress has many lives.
Yeah, and I think that's also a perfect segue into individual action. You do talk about, well, throughout the book, there's implied individual action everywhere. But at the end, you do have a list of various individual actions people can take. We've touched on a number of them. Out of all of those, and kind of as a conclusion to our chat, out of all those, are there a few that you recommend people do that you think might be the easiest for anyone to do, of any located in any region, rural, urban, of any income level, age? What do you recommend over everything else?
The most basic, the most easy thing is to wash your clothes less and wash them with cold water. And I'll explain why. If you wash them less, they last longer, because they aren't being beaten to death by the tumbler, right? You're also releasing less microfibers, which we didn't even touch on, but I do talk about in the book, which are the little plastic fibers of polyester into the water stream, which then goes, into the food chain, and then we wind up eating, because you're not spitting them around like crazy. Then, and particularly wash your jeans less. They don't really like to be washed anyway, but you don't have to wash them after one wearing. You can wash them once a month and they'll be perfectly fine. They'll be actually better. And then wash them on cold water, because that releases less microfibers, because you're not heating up the fabric, but also you're not heating up the water, so you're saving energy. And you're not boiling them to death, so they're not fading so quickly, and the seams aren't going to crack so fast, and all those things that hot does to things. And then wash them on the short cycle. They will still get perfectly clean. and you're using less energy, less water, and you're giving your clothes a longer life. Again, because you're not beating them to death. So if you wash on cold, short cycle, and wash your jeans less, you will already have an enormous impact on society as well as the planet, because you don't need to replace your clothes so often, so we don't need to make so many, and you're not using so much energy, and you're not releasing so much mess into the water system. I spell out in the book, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but I spell out, like, if you just do, each person does this one, just switches, like the enormous savings of electricity and water. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. So something as simple as that makes all the difference.
Well, and even I would think that'd be in your own interest, because it would save you money.
And it saves you
in the
money.
end, right? And I think it's a testament to the fact that we're just
your electricity bill.
right, exactly. And it's a testament to the fact that we are so our habits are just so ingrained, and we don't want to change. And it takes something simple sometimes to start.
Yeah.
I appreciate you having this chat with me. I wanted to give you a moment to say any final words as we wrap up this chat. You have anything? Yeah, that's it.
I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season.
Yes, and keep this in mind too as you're buying presents for people. It's very timely. So as I mentioned, we talked about Fashionopolis by Dana Thomas. We have it in our library catalog, physically in the library, as well as the ebook. So please go check it out and read more up on.
I also recorded the audio if you want to download the audio.
Yes, you'll be able to hear Dana herself. Thank you very much for being here, Dana.
Thank you. My pleasure.